The room smelled like paper and cold coffee. It was 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in September 1976. The corridor outside the state court of São Paulo was already packed. Not with the usual defendants, but with journalists, photographers, and men in suits carrying thick folders. Families who had not been invited came anyway. Whenever Chico Xavier's name appeared, the families always came. The man conducting the hearing was Dr. Marcio Andrade Silveira, 53 years old, state prosecutor for 26. Son of a judge, grandson of a notary. Built by the law like houses from stone. Not in a hurry, not with ornament, but with the deliberate intention to last. He had gray hair combed to the side, a line so straight it looked drawn with a ruler. He spoke in the low, measured voice of someone who learned early that slow sounds more certain. He did not like Chico Xavier. It was not personal. He prided himself on nothing being personal. It was professional, which was worse. Marcio Andrade Silveira had spent 14 months building this case. He collected testimonies from psychologists describing the vulnerability of grieving families who sought Chico out. He commissioned graphological reports comparing handwriting and psychographed books with Chico's own script. He consulted 2 paranormal researchers from the University of São Paulo. They agreed that no scientific evidence supported the claim of communication with the dead, and he had a witness. The witness was the centerpiece. The witness was, he believed, the final blow. Her name was Dona Conceição, 61 years old. A widow, she lived in the Brás neighborhood of São Paulo. Her only son, Rodrigo, had died in a traffic accident in March of 1974. 6 months after his death, a relative had taken her to a session at a spiritist center. She had received what they called a letter from her son. She had believed in the letter. She had clung to it with the specific desperation of a woman who had lost her only child and had nothing left to hold. Marcio Andrade Silveira had spoken with her 3 times. He had built, with surgical patience, the argument that she had been manipulated, that the letter contained only emotional generalities, the kind of thing any grieving person wants to hear, the kind of thing any competent fraud could manufacture, that the specificity she felt in the letter was the product of her own projection, her own need, not of any real communication. She had agreed across all 3 conversations. She had agreed with her head down and her eyes dry. The way a woman agrees when someone with authority explains, very clearly, that the most important thing that ever happened to her was an illusion. She was coming to the courthouse to testify that she had been deceived. It was the last piece. Her testimony, expert reports, and specialist witnesses would produce an official record. Not a criminal proceeding, but a public document. A court record stating justice found fraud. Public documents have weight. They survive. Chico Xavier arrived at 9:15 with his young attorney Geraldo Mendes, who seemed terrified but tried not to show it. Chico wore a dark suit, white shirt, thick glasses. At 66, he looked smaller, quieter, yet more present than photos suggested. He greeted the officer, looked around, then sat. He waited with a unique presence, not calculating or afraid, but simply present. Marcio Andrade Silveira ignored him, organizing papers with precision, reflecting his ordered arguments. 6 others were present: assistants, Chico's attorney, a graphological expert, a psychologist, and Dona Conceição, looking at the floor. Journalists waited outside. Inside, a photographer was instructed not to photograph Dona Conceição without permission. The session opened at 9:32. Marcio Andrade Silveira began with expert reports. He argued psychography lacked scientific basis, and documents showed ordinary handwriting. The graphological expert confirmed technical points. The psychologist described how grief made people susceptible to generic material. Chico listened to all of it. He took no notes, made no gestures of disagreement, and did not look to his attorney. He watched the people speaking with the complete, non-judgmental attention of someone who finds human beings genuinely interesting. Geraldo Mendez asked a few technical questions. The answers satisfied the prosecutor. The session moved forward smoothly. Then it was time for Dona Conceição. Marcio Andrade Silveira turned to her with calculated gentleness, understanding she needed to feel safe to speak. He used her name, thanked her, and acknowledged her courage, carefully choosing words to guide her testimony. Dona Conceição lifted her eyes from the floor. Her face, marked by 2 years of grief, showed reorganized pain, a functional form to continue, not collapse. Marcio Andrade Silveira asked her to describe receiving the letter. Her voice low but steady, she described her sister-in-law taking her to the center and receiving a letter from Rodrigo. Marcio Andrade Silveira then asked, with a soft, sharp tone, "You understand this letter was not from your son, correct? That the content was generic enough to apply to anyone in grief." There was a pause, not of searching for words, but of deciding which direction to take. Dona Conceição looked at Marcio Andrade Silveira, then at Chico Xavier, who was looking at the table. She looked back at the prosecutor. "No," she said. The word sat in the room with specific weight. Marcio Andrade Silveira did not show surprise, but a sudden tension appeared in his shoulders. "Could you elaborate?" he said, his voice maintaining the same tone, requiring effort. Dona Conceição opened her black purse and took out an envelope, creased from frequent handling. She placed it on the table, but did not open it. "The letter was not generic," she said. "I tried to believe it was when you explained it, but I know what was in the letter. I know what Rodrigo said." "Dona Conceição," said Marcio Andrade Silveira, repositioning, "you are emotionally involved. The court requires—" He mentioned the dog, she said. Silence. The dog's name was Farofa. "A mixed breed we had when Rodrigo was a child. He died when Rodrigo was 12. Rodrigo had a specific way of calling that dog, a whistle. 3 notes in a particular sequence that only he made. It was not a generic whistle. It was his. The letter described that whistle. It described the 3 notes. It described how the dog would come running before Rodrigo even crouched down, jumping on him the moment he heard it. I never told anyone that. Not my sister-in-law. Not you in the 3 times we spoke. Because it is such a small thing, such a particular thing, that I had not even thought about it consciously. Until I read it in the letter and felt the floor disappear beneath me." She stopped, breathed. Dr. Rinaldo Braga, the psychologist, had his pen motionless above his notepad. Marcio Andrade Silveira said, "Emotionally charged memories can—" "There is more," said Dona Conceição. She opened the envelope. She removed a sheet of paper folded in quarters, the folds worn deep from being opened and refolded many times. She did not read it. She held it in both hands, looking at it, and spoke from memory because she knew every word. "He mentioned the last time we argued, 3 weeks before the accident. I said something I should not have said. It was something only the 2 of us knew. There was no one else in the room when I said it. The letter apologized for the way he responded, not for the argument in general, for the specific response he gave. It used the exact words he used that day. The authorized photographer had lowered the camera. And then," she said, and her voice was breaking now, not with collapse, but with the sound of someone who has reached the boundary of what can be said before the body intervenes. "He mentioned a promise I made to him when he was 7 years old. A small promise, a mother's promise to a small boy, one I had not consciously remembered making until he mentioned it in the letter. That one day we would live near the ocean, that he would have a room with a window facing the sea. I never kept that promise. Life was what life was. He grew up, moved out. I stayed in Brars, and in the letter he said it was all right. He said the window he has now is larger than any window I could ever have given him." The room went silent. not the silence of a pause. The silence of a space that has been transformed by something that passed through it, and that no one yet knows how to name. Marcio Andrade Silveira was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice had lost its calculated cadence. Not dramatically, but the rhythm had changed. The way a rhythm changes when the person speaking is, for the first time, without a clear sense of what to say next. You understand that these details could have been obtained through research. He began. By whom? She said. It was not an aggressive question. It was genuine. I never wrote about Farofa. I never told anyone what I said during the argument. The promise about the ocean, it did not even exist as a conscious memory for me before I read it in the letter. How does someone research something that even the person herself had forgotten existed? Marcio Andrade Silveira did not answer. Dr. Fonseca, the graphological expert, was looking at his own papers with the expression of a man silently re-examining the premises of his work. Geraldo Mendez, Chico's young attorney, had his hands folded on the table and was looking at them with the focused stillness of someone making a considerable effort not to show what he was feeling. Chico Xavier remained with his hands on the table. There was no triumph in his face, no relief, the same quiet presence he had brought into the room, as though what was happening confirmed something he had long since stopped needing to have confirmed, and what remained was only a gentle attention to the human process of arrival. Marcio Andrade Silveira called a 15-minute recess. It lasted 42. When the session resumed, something had shifted in the prosecutor. Not a capitulation. Men like him do not capitulate. But there was a different economy in his movements. A containment that was not the earlier containment of someone in control. It was the containment of someone managing something that had left his control and deciding what the most dignified posture was. He asked Dona Conceição several more questions. They were more technical, more defensive, aimed at establishing in the record that the court had done its due diligence. She answered with the patience of someone who has said what she came to say and has nothing left to prove. Then he turned to Chico Xavier and asked the question he had prepared as the climax of the session. The question that, in the original plan, was designed to produce a vague answer he could use to demonstrate that the medium operated entirely in generalities. He asked, "Can you explain, in technical and verifiable terms, how the process of psychography occurs?" Chico looked at him through the thick glasses. "No," he said. Marcio Andrade Silveira waited. "I cannot explain it in technical and verifiable terms," Chico continued, with the same quietness as always. "I can describe what I experience, which is different. It feels as though someone places a hand over my hand. Not physically. It is a sensation of direction, of light weight, of an intention that is not mine guiding the movement. The handwriting changes because it is not me writing. The content arrives the way it arrives when you are listening and transcribing at the same time. I do not know the mechanism. I have never known it. 50 years of this, and the mechanism remains what it is, something that happens, that I do not control, and that occasionally reaches exactly the right person with exactly what they needed to hear." He paused for a moment. "If that is enough for you, I am glad. If it is not, I understand. I have nothing more than that to offer." The official record produced by that court on that day concluded, in the bureaucratic language that official records use to describe things that do not fit, inside official records, that the allegations of fraud had not been substantively supported by the elements presented. It was not an acquittal. It was not a validation. It was what happens when an institution, built to measure the measurable, encounters something it cannot measure. It records the encounter without knowing what to do with it and moves on. Marcio Andrade Silveira left the room without speaking to anyone. The journalists who had come expecting to leave with the story of the public fall of South America's most beloved medium left with a different story. Dona Conceição folded the letter back along its worn creases, placed it in the envelope, placed the envelope in the black purse. She stood with the slowness of someone whose legs have been made heavy by the effort of what she just did. One of the prosecutor's assistants, a young man of perhaps 25, who had been sitting against the wall and had not said a word during the entire session, stood and offered her a glass of water. She accepted it. She drank slowly. She thanked him with the naturalness of someone who still believes that small gestures are the ones that matter most. Chico Xavier rose from the table, adjusted his jacket, and walked to her. He said nothing for a moment. He stood in front of her, small and still, with the eyes that seemed to see past the face of a person, past the room, past the specific day and its specific circumstances. And when he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she and the two people closest to them heard it. "Rodrigo knew you would come today," he said. "He asked me to tell you that the window is real, that it is large, that there is light through it all day." Dona Conceição closed her eyes. She stayed that way for perhaps 10 seconds. Eyes closed, black purse in her lap, glass of water in her hand, and when she opened them, there was in her face the quality that people who had witnessed Chico's sessions described and struggled to put into language. Not joy exactly, not relief exactly, but recognition. The specific confirmation of something carried alone, in silence, without certainty that you had the right to believe it. "I know," she said. "I always knew." Chico nodded. He picked up his jacket, said a word to the young attorney, and left through the side door with the same absence of theater with which he had entered. No statement for the press, no expression of victory. None of the performances the situation would have justified, and that almost anyone else would have made. Outside, the journalists were waiting. He said good morning to each one who approached him. He answered 2 brief questions with the direct, unadorned honesty that always confused people expecting evasion. He got into a car that was waiting, not his borrowed, as almost everything at that point in his life was borrowed and was gone. What remained in that room, after everyone had left, was something that Dona Eloisa, the stenographer who had transcribed the session, and had done so for dozens of hearings across 20 years of courthouse work, tried to describe to a colleague in the corridor afterward. While packing up her equipment, she said, "I have been in rooms where important things happen. You can feel it. It is different. Something stays." The colleague asked what had stayed. Dona Eloisa thought for a moment. "I cannot name it," she said, "but it was heavy in the way that good things are heavy, the way true things weigh." She turned off the light and closed the door. The corridor was empty. Outside, São Paulo, that enormous, indifferent, magnificent city in the heart of South America, continued being itself, without pause, without deference to the extraordinary. But in that corridor, for a moment, there was the kind of silence that remains after something real has passed through a place, the kind of silence that justice has no form to record, but that everyone who was there that day carried home.